Good. What are you doing?
Filming a video
What's what for these?
about selecting crankbaits.
Like what colors for different colors, water and lakes?
Nope, we're doing about how deep they'll run and the kind of action they'll have. Yeah. Hey everybody, welcome back. We're back here in the garage, and today's topic, something that I want to share with you all about, is about selecting crankbaits. When you go into the store, you head to Bass Pro Shops, and you're thinking, man, I want to look at some crankbaits. I want to try to make a good decision based on whatever's going on your current body of water out there. You know, if those fish are shallow, if they're mid-range, if they're deep, and trying to pick a bait, that really hits that depth range that you're looking to go out there and go fish in. So, looking at an array of crankbaits all across the board, I'll start off by saying this. It's a lot different than what it was when I was getting started fishing, because a lot of our stuff, you'd walk up there, you'd look at the pack, and it may say this bait runs 4 to 8 foot. It may have no depth indicated on it whatsoever as to how deep that bait goes. You just have to make your best judgment looking at it as an angler. Say, well, I think this bait's going to run, maybe it'll run 5 feet, maybe it'll run 10 feet. You don't really know till you get it out to the lake. So a lot of companies, knowing that and knowing that customers want to know just how deep that bait's going to go before they ever purchase it, a lot of them help the customers by putting that information on there. But some of that, it's going to be accurate. Some of it may be off a little bit. I'm thankful that I work with Rapala, and I feel like most all of their baits are pretty accurate. That DT lineup is really, to me, kind of what set the industry standard in that. And you take that from that little DT4, that is a 4-foot running bait, all the way out to the DT20, which is a big deep diving crankbait that will reach 20 feet deep on a cast. So I think were one of the first companies who really embraced just how important that was for those customers to be able to walk in a store, pick up a bait off a shelf and say, this bait is going to run how deep I'm expecting it to. So for one, absolutely, you've got a lot more information out there now to be able to make a good decision when you're buying those baits. But some baits still don't have that marked on it. And this is going to be a little bit about diving depth as well as action. So just to go through a few things real quick. When you're looking at a crankbait, anything that has a more turned down lip profile, something like that DT4, a lot of your square bills, they're going to have a lip with considerable more angle to them. That is going to do a few things, but number one, the first thing you should think when you're seeing a bait with a steeper lip angle is that's going to be a shallower water bait, a shallower running bait. There aren't many baits out there that have a steep, what I would consider a steep bill angle, such as that DT4, anywhere in that range that are going to run any more than 6 feet deep. Only some really specialized, very large baits that do still have a big lip like that or a turn down lip like that, but a much larger one, are going to get more than 5 or 6 feet deep. Any bait that's got more of a turn down lip like that, even if that lip came out longer, like if you took that exact bait, that DT4, the lip at that angle, and you ran that lip out another 1/2 inch, I'm going to say you wouldn't gain more than another 1 foot or maybe 2 of depth out of it. That's all it's going to do, just given the angle, that's in there. So just keep that in mind. And then you go to something that's maybe a little bit more moderate, so like a DT6. It's got a little bit of an angle to it, but it's not straight out, but it's not turned down near as much as that 4. It's about the same amount of bill, especially if you look at the surface area and about how far it comes out of the bait. It maybe is only 1/4 inch more, but considerable less angle and considerable less on the width. So really has a lot less surface area on that bill, but it does get that bait down at least a couple feet deeper, probably more like 3. I feel like I can get a DT6 about 7 feet on any cast on 12-pound fluorocarbon. So definitely that little bit less angle, just a little bit straighter, does help get that bait, a considerable amount deeper. Looking at another bait here, this is actually a 13 fishing bait. And this one, it says on the bill that it'll run about 8 feet. And if you look at the lip on it, compared to the body size is really similar to that of a DT6. Just a little bit more lip. And again, a pretty similar on the angle, really, on that. It's turned down, angled down just a little bit. Not quite as steep as the 6, but again, a little bit more surface area, a little bit more width out towards the end of it. and that one definitely will get just a little bit deeper than what that DT6 will. So one thing to keep in mind, that little bit of difference in angle, okay? You look at that little bit of difference, that DT6 is gonna have a fair amount more thump than what that bait right there is. That lip being that much straighter, it really reminds me of like that bait. A very, very tight wiggling bait. The lip comes out of it, you know, almost straight out, just a touch turned down, but almost straight out, and that makes for a much tighter wiggling bait. And to me, that leads you to the very tightest, best cold water bait, which is a Shad Rap. Now this is a big one. This is a, what is that one? That's a 8 is what size that one is. But yeah, a Shad Rap, you know, those very narrow lip, you know, it doesn't get much wider than the bait. Very narrow, long, straight lip. That is obviously a very good shallow water bait, but a very tight wiggling bait as well in those Shad Raps. So now jumping around a little bit more here, look at something that's going to still be in that, you know, 8 to 10 foot range. It's a Storm Wigglewort, an excellent bait. You know, I mean, at times cold water, that thing is just unbelievable, especially when those fish are keyed in on crawfish. And now let's look at some similarities, because these are both baits that are going to run 8 to 9 feet, okay? A little bit different profile. That Wigglewort is a much more round bait, where this 13 is definitely a little bit flatter sided bait. Overall, pretty close to the same length as far as the body, about the same amount of bill. You know, if you took the surface area, the Wigglewort's a little wider, but a little bit shorter, where that 13 is a touch longer, touch narrower. You know, so you've got a lot of similarities there. The angles are actually, in my opinion, pretty close. You know, they've just got they're, you know, a little bit turned down, but these baits couldn't be much more different in the water. And a big part of that, the best that I can tell, the best of my knowledge, is a little bit of the weighting. That Wigglewort, I think the weight is a little bit more, you know, it's a little bit more in the center of the bait, where I feel like this 13, it helps keep it a little bit more nose down. I feel like that Wigglewort is weighted just a little bit different, but that bill has a big scoop to it. And that scoop, and being so wide all the way out to the end where it doesn't taper like this one does, being almost a square bill but long, it really makes that bait have a very, very wide wobble. Anybody that's ever thrown a Wigglewort, it's crazy how wide of a wobble that it has. It just really shifts around incredibly. But that has to do, I believe, a lot to do with the cup of that lip. It's funny to me looking at it and how similar the bill angles are, and why that bait acts the way it does. That one's always been kind of one that's threw me for a loop, just to be quite honest. But something with the way the bait's weighted, and then the way that that lip is shaped with that cup in it, really catches that water and makes that bait, you know, have just that exaggerated wide wobble to it. Let's see. I want to show, really, you know, I was talking a little bit about the DT4 and that turn down angle. Something with the DT4 that is different from most square bills, especially with a steeper angle. Generally, the steeper the angle you get, the tighter that bait is going to be, okay? Or the wider that bait's going to be, I'm sorry. The steeper the angle of the bill, the wider the wobble is going to be. But a big thing that affects that is where that line tie is. So on that DT4, the line tie is out away from the bait a little bit, okay? If that line tie was in the nose of the bait, this bait would be considerably more wobble. It'd have a lot more wobble to it. But that line tie being out in the bill just a little bit, it really tightens this bait up. Now you take like something like this big brat that has a really steep lip and the line tie up in the bait, dude, this thing is extremely wide. I mean, it is all over the place. So that is a major, major difference between, you know, something that has similar bill angles, but a different line tie placement. So those are key components as well. That line tie placement really moves around the action of the bait. Just to go through a couple more here, moving out towards a little bit deeper divers, almost all of your deeper running baits are going to have almost all of your deeper running baits are going to have a straighter lip in them. They almost have to be able to get the depth out of those baits of what you're trying to do. So they're all going to be fairly straight out, fairly flat. It's going to come out, you know, the further it comes out off the bait, the longer the lip is, generally the deeper it's going to run. But a big thing is with that line tie. If you move that line tie out too far, like on that DT10, if that line tie was on out here, the bait wouldn't run whatsoever. If you move it in too tight to the bait, you're not going to get the maximum depth out of it. So it's definitely a balancing act of moving that line tie in or out. And that too will affect the action of the bait. You can move it a little closer to the bait and get a little more, a little more thump out of it. You can move it out a little farther, gain some depth, but also tighten the bait up. The final thing to look at on a lot of deep, especially really deep running crankbaits, is if it has a piece of weight, any type of disc in the lip. That DT20, that's really one of the biggest differences with it compared to DT16. They're almost identical, if not identical bodies. So the actual bait itself is exactly the same. The length of the bill is nearly the same. That 20 is a little bit wider and just a touch longer, but it does have that little disc in the bill, which helps when that bait hits the water, it turns it at a much steeper angle. So like a 16 probably sits about like that. That 20 sits about like that, just at rest. And that's gonna help that bait get deeper even quicker than what that DT16 does. So that's just one thing when you're looking for a lot of really deep running baits. Sometimes those with that little disc in the lip will help get them a little bit deeper. So hope you've enjoyed this. There's a lot of different parts on a crankbait, between the shape of the bill, where the line tie is, where the weight's positioned at in the bait, the angle of the bill. A lot of factors go into it, but hopefully this will help you make a better decision next time you head to the store.